everyone. I thought today we'd have a little look at some comparative poetry questions. So, for the purpose of today's session, we will pretend that our focus is compare how poets present war, In Charge of the Light Brigade, and one other poem you have studied from Power and Conflict. So if this were our question, where might we start? A good approach would be to start with the named poem itself, The Charge of the Light Brigade by Alfred Tennyson. So what do we already know about the poet? Well, he was born in 1809 and died in 1892. He was actually the poet laureate when he wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade, and Queen Victoria once described him as very peculiar looking, tall, dark, with a long black beard and flowing hair. The poem recounts the ill-advised real story of the Battle of Balaclava, which sent 673 cavalrymen to their deaths. Let's remind ourselves of the poem itself.
Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward, the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do or die. Into the valley of death, rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, boldly they rode so well. Into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabring the gunners there, charging an army, while all the world wondered. Plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the sabre stroke, shattered and sundered. Then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horses and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, left of 600. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honour the charge they made, honour the Light Brigade, noble 600.
So let's come up with our 4 key points, answering the question exactly. So how is war presented? Well, first of all, we get a real sense of bravery of war. Although the reader, and in fact the soldiers themselves, are aware of their impending death, they continue to charge, riding and crying out towards the jaws of death. Secondly, we could also argue that there's a real sense of the fighting within the war. The soldiers are faced by cannon upon cannon being fired at them, and there's a real sense of relentlessness through the repetition and chaotic images of the soldiers surrounded by the battle. So the actual fighting itself within war is described in this. A third point could be that Tennyson really presents us with the futility of war, and particularly knowing the historical content and the mentioning of the blundered command, the soldiers still continue to ride to their death. Obviously, the fact that it repeats 600 emphasises the pointlessness and the amount that were literally riding to their deaths. Finally, we could also say that there's a sense of the duty of war here. The tone is really prideful. There's a real celebratory tone within this as we honour the noble 600. So let's think about the poem that we might compare that to. And take a pause. We haven't annotated the poem, we haven't looked at the separate techniques and the features within it. We're now thinking of an overview, and we look at those 4 key points and compare it to Bayonet Charge. Again, let's quickly remind ourselves of the poet himself. So Ted Hughes was born in 1930 and died in 1998. Like Tennyson, he was also the poet laureate. He's famously known for being married to Sylvia Plath. His earlier poetic works are usually rooted in nature, and in particular, he likes to highlight an innocent savagery of animals, which we can definitely see in Bayonet Charge. So this poem recounts the journey of a single soldier describing being in camp to fighting in warfare. There is a real emphasis on the soldier's terror, shock, and confusion. There's also a real sense of the futility in war, similar to the futility of the noble 600. Again, let's remind ourselves of the poem itself.
Suddenly he awoke and was running, raw in raw-seamed hot khaki, his sweat heavy, stumbling across a field of clots towards the green hedge that dazzled with rifle fire, hearing bullets smacking the belly out of the air. He lugged a rifle, numb as a smashed arm, the patriotic tear that had brimmed in his eye, sweating like molten iron from the centre of his chest. In bewilderment, then he almost stopped. In what cold clockwork of the stars and the nations was he the hand pointing that second? He was running like a man who had jumped up in the dark and runs listening between his footfalls for the reason of his still running. And his foot hung like a statue tree in mid-stride. Then the shot/furrows threw up a yellow hair that rolled like a flame and crawled in the threshing circle, its mouth wide open, silent, its eyes standing out. He plunged past with his bayonet toward the green hedge. King, honour, human dignity, etc. dropped like luxuries in a yelling alarm. To get out the blue crackling air, his terrors touchy dynamite.
Again, let's think about those 4 points. So we started by saying that in Charge of the Light Brigade, we got a real sense of the bravery of war. How can we compare that to this second poem? Well, actually, unlike the Charge of the Light Brigade, the bravery here is not actually glorified or celebrated. Here, it's more of a fight or flight image as the men are fighting to continue to run directly into the conflict. That could be our first point of comparison. Secondly, we said that in Charge of the Light Brigade, we had a description of the fighting within war, the conflict within it itself. Here, the brutal and vivid metaphorical description of that yellow hair with its mouth open silent is reflective of the chaos and ruthlessness of the fighting itself. Our third point was that Tennyson presented this futility of war. And actually in here, instead of the army described in Charge of the Light Brigade, here we have a singular soldier's experience of his war. The bewilderment and questioning really shows that fragility of life and the pointlessness. Finally, there is a sense of duty here. This is not sensationalised or glamorous though. The role of the soldier here is questioned and the duty of war becomes a brutal realism in comparison to that bravery and nobility that we saw in Tennyson's poem. Again, we haven't zoomed in, we haven't thought about these techniques or highlighted certain words. We've actually, again, thought of that overview. What are the big ideas? What could be our main points of comparison? That's where we start. And then we zoom into the methods that perhaps have been used. So we can look across at our points of comparison on both of the poems, and these could become 4 separate paragraphs, and they could become an essay. So for example, let's take this one, the duty of war. Now there's no right or wrong way of structuring this, but there is a really easy, simple structure that you could follow to really help you. So it could be advisable to start with this introductory topic sentence that covers both of the poems. So both aim to do this, whereas one does it like this and one does it like that. Or, unlike the first poem, the second puts a real emphasis on this, which means this. Something like that. So a really good, strong topic sentence that could cover both poems. You then give all of your evidence for poem 1 and you analyse, and that's key. You have to give that further analysis for it to be a good piece of analysis, not just therefore war is presented as negative. So you give your evidence from poem 1, then you give your evidence and your analysis from poem 2, and then it's a really nice summary at the end in the final linking sentence. This is what it might look like.
Brilliant. I hope you enjoyed that session and found it useful. Now, good luck revising.